We understand.
Okay, all right. So I guess we're calling the meeting to order.
Do it.
Okay, citizens' comments, not related to the public hearing. I don't see any citizens. Dawn, do you have anything not related to the public hearing?
Nope, everything's for the public hearing.
All right,
Right.
then we're just moving right along. Number 3 on our agenda is the active agenda. We've got approval of the January 22nd meeting minutes. Everyone have a chance to review any notes?
None I
And I
caught,
would
so
too.
I would make a motion to approve.
And I will second.
Perfect. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. I was waiting for that, and that was me. That's bad. Okay, moving on to item B. The public hearing and recommendation to council on zoning code amendment ZA-224. So I'll explain the public hearing process to the audience that's not here. Maybe someone's watching. So it is to consider recommending to city council approval or denial of zoning code amendments to remove the prohibition of the use of shipping containers as buildings. So we will open the public hearing. Staff will have a presentation, any testimony from the public, commissioners can ask questions, and then we will close the public hearing and deliberate. Okay, catch them all? All right.
Yep.
So then I guess the public hearing is now
Officially.
going open. So staff's presentation?
I don't really have a presentation. You guys have seen this before. City code, specifically chapter 37 zoning, has prohibited the use of shipping containers in the city. In most all of our zoning districts, except just industrial zones, in the airport zone, and even there only on a temporary basis. Over time, market demand has increased to such that people want to have them, and they've been buying them and putting them on their properties at both commercial and residential zones. But because our code enforcement is reactive and not proactive, and we weren't getting complaints on them, they're all over the city now. So brought it to city council, June last year. They initiated a code amendment to remove the prohibition from the code, and this hearing tonight is to make a recommendation to them to remove the prohibition so that shipping containers could be legalized and permitted to be used as buildings in the city.
Follow up, we already did this.
Yes.
Yeah.
We've already made the recommendation to city council.
Right, and then it went to council for hearing. And they didn't make a decision. They asked staff to go back and take another look at it and come back with some additional options, and they batted it around some more, and ultimately, most recently decided that they wanted to go back to what they started with, which is to allow them, but they wanted to do it in a slightly different way, language-wise in the code. And so the change to the original ordinance, the city attorney, I think, determined that it had to come back to planning and zoning. Even though effectively it's doing the same thing as what you saw last time, the verbiage is just different.
All right, so then there's no public to give testimony. Is there any? Okay.
I have 2 emails that I'm gonna read into you guys. The first one is from Marilyn Irvine from Lewiston. I'm writing to ask you to vote against the placement of shipping containers in residential neighborhoods. These ugly Hulk downgrade the appearance of the neighborhoods. We have 2 of these industrial boxes in our neighborhood, and they are eyesores. Vote against the placement of shipping containers in neighborhoods. They belong in industrial parks. If people need additional storage, there are many commercial storage units to choose from in the LC Valley. Secondly, I saw in today's Tribune that it has been proposed that the parking requirements for newly multifamily units be reduced.
Vice Chair, that piece is irrelevant to this hearing, so.
Okay.
Okay. Sorry.
Testimony from William First to know. I apologize for not appearing in person to present my testimony, but prior commitment makes that inadvisable. 3 decades ago, out of a sense of civic pride, our city council decided to ban the installation of shipping containers for use as storage units in residential areas and limit the temporary use of these eyesores in a commercial zone. Back then, city officials recognized that shipping containers were unsightly, contribute to the degradation of neighborhoods, and were rightly perceived as trashy. This law 30 years ago is still on the books, and it should stay on the books. But over time, the code has been flagrantly violated.
Flagrantly.
Thank you. And enforcement has been largely ignored. Thus, illegal shipping containers are scattered all over town. This is a clear illustration of the fact that ignoring bad behavior leads to more bad behavior. So now, you members of the Planning and Zoning Commission are being asked to reward bad behavior by throwing out the present law and replacing it with one that would allow the installation of shipping containers in all zones, anywhere in the city, in any neighborhood. Shipping containers are not necessarily buildings. Shipping containers are shipping containers. Nothing can change that. And reward bad behavior for whatever reason is never a good idea, because those who are misbehaving might get used to it. What's next on the list of existing piles of junk that should be allowed? Just because? This town needs to be cleaned up, and here's a good place to start. Let's keep the present laws that bans shipping containers. Let's not reverse one of the following options we citizens of Lewiston have to that protect us from having to put up with this kind of stuff.
Any rebuttal or questions from?
I would love to hear the verbiage change between what we had presented and what.
So the first time you saw the ordinance and recommended that the council approve the renewal of prohibition, the way it was to achieve it was to add shipping container explicitly within the definition of the term building. And then we would remove section 37-129, which was all the provisions that spoke to the prohibition. So the prohibition verbiage or provisions would go away. And by default, because shipping container was included in the definition of building, they would have been allowed. The way it's coming back to you now is they would be allowed by virtue of, again, of removal of the provisions prohibiting them, and instead adding them to the general provisions for accessory buildings by listing them there instead of in the definition of building.
Thank you.
So it's placement more than anything.
Correct.
In tonight's packet, there's a copy of the previously proposed ordinance and the newly proposed ordinance. And you can look at those two.
I had them open
Or if
today,
you
but
need
not at
to.
the same time side to side. So thank you.
Yeah, it just achieves it in a different way, in a different location.
Questions for staff? So now we will close the public hearing and deliberate our reasons again. Betty, do you want to lead us off?
I would be happy if it's just, we put the comma in the wrong place or we're using the wrong terminology. To me, that strikes me as city council wanting the removal of the prohibition of shipping containers. But if they really want it back here so that we start discussion and we now have additional commentary about public disapproval of the free-for-all that sounds like we're opening it up to. Accessory buildings do come with code requirements, I think setbacks, et cetera. At this particular juncture, storage containers are labeled as temporary if they are permitted, whereas accessory building is a permanent fixture. So that's a designation that we're acknowledging. And setbacks aside, we don't have what I would call enforcement. So if somebody comes in and gets a permit, to put one in at no additional cost to themselves, no permit fees. And is told how to handle it, they can still jam it on their fence line, they can still block a neighbor view, they can still, so. In my opinion, if we really want to revisit this hardcore, let's talk about the different zones that we already have, and let's talk about the lot sizes that we already have. And figure out how necessary it truly is. I mean, because what we don't have is we don't have an enforcement office. We have an information officer. That's an entirely different thing.
Sure.
Yes.
Just so in case it's not clear, because you mentioned whether or not city council wanted you to open up for full revisiting. There was no direction by them to do that. By default, it's inherent in the public hearing process that you have the opportunity to do that. But the council did not express any desire to revisit all of those issues previously visited.
Maybe they should quit bouncing it back to us.
Mo, thoughts?
I like the fact that we are taking it and moving it from it being under the buildings to now it being under accessories. I think that's a much more fitting designation for these, because that's really what they are at the end of the day, is this is an accessory. I don't know, I take a very libertarian view on the idea of it's my property, and if that is the most effective storage container. I've seen storage sheds that are 10 times uglier than a shipping container. Shipping containers have a tendency, just by their very design and their very makeup, to be more secure. I know lots of people who use them because they have animals. And as somebody who has animals, I love the idea of having something. If I could fit one on my property, I would probably be eyeballing it, because they're designed to keep rodents and pests and things like that out. And so, people can complain about how it looks on the outside. There is nothing in code that stops somebody from parking an ugly camper on their property. There is nothing that stops them from piling up junker cars, things like that. It all comes down to code enforcement, et cetera. I'm a live and let live. If somebody wants to use a shipping container rather than going and buying an overpriced, shed that's going to wear and tear anyway. And quite honestly, I've seen shipping container houses and they can be done up quite lovely.
Ready? Any thoughts?
Really. Move is really just to put it under accessory
Sorry, buildings.
buildings.
Yeah.
And that would not require people to get permits for them.
That would
The
go.
zoning code doesn't have anything to do with whether or not permits are required. And that's all you're visiting, is whether or not it's appropriate to allow them in the city. Yep, and the building code will dictate whether or not permits are required. So they'll be treated just like any stick frame building or kit building or anything else.
For size and stuff.
All limited the same way as like a pole barn or a shed or anything else. Yeah, all those regulations apply to shipping containers as for a shed or anything else. Yep, yep.
I think an property owner can build up to, and I'm gonna probably get this wrong, but I think that they can build up to something under 200 square feet footprint without a permit.
Yeah, there's two different square footage triggers. One is for residential and one's for commercial. But yeah, that's all dictated by the building code.
Okay,
So if the shipping container is larger than 200 square. Then it
Which
would.
10 by 20 is a huge shipping container.
There are kind of standard sizes.
Yeah.
They're pretty big.
I don't know if any of them are really under.
Most of them are 12 and 16 foot.
so a perfect example on, I believe,
And
my
most of them
drive,
are
my
only
drive
8 foot.
home on 8th, which is a heavily trafficked.
Mhm.
I don't know how the hell he got it in there. But that is his view, is the container, he got it right against his fence line.
Yeah.
Between him and his southern neighbor. Creative tarping and draping of tarps and. So I think the people that are gonna make something look craptastic are gonna make their property look craptastic no matter what it is. And they're not gonna follow the steps or the city's requirements anyway. And we already know that the city is not gonna go back and retroactively enforce any of those unless there are heavy complaints about it.
With all of that I'm pretty sure we already discussed back in June. Anyone?
I will make a motion, go ahead and recommend approval of ZA 0224 to the city council.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
Got more input from
So,
public.
and with that, it passes 3-1. Okay. Moving on to staff commission communications. You have anything under that?
Just to let you know that we've got a public hearing on a conditional use permit application scheduled for February 26th. So we'll need a quorum for that meeting. As far as I know, we will have. And then if you hadn't tracked it, the zoning code amendment to amend the small lot development standards went to city council for public hearing. And they passed the first reading of the ordinance, but they changed it so that the developers would only have to meet 2 of the 10 design standards instead of the 5.
Thank you for all your due diligence.
Right.
So is there anyone that's going to be absent at our next meeting? And on being here?
Not planned as of yet.
I had a quick little update for you guys. I haven't had the opportunity to send out an advice letter about this. But the Idaho Supreme Court has recently issued a new decision related to CUPs. I'm pulling up the case name real quick, but the gist of the opinion is making sure that boards and commissions appropriately identify the specific standards and criteria for which they're basing their decisions on. And obviously, the longer the record is, the longer your decision should be. It was Veterans Park Neighborhood Association Incorporated versus the City of Boise. And it's one of those instances where the Supreme Court eventually did reverse the decision of the city council for the City of Boise and remanded the matter back to them for further discussion. Reversed the granting of the CUP. So I will be issuing an advice letter about it, emphasizing the importance of making sure you clearly articulate and state why you're basing your decisions and on what factors you're basing your decisions upon. For the most part, we do a fairly good job, especially here where you go and you poll everybody, but making sure instead of just agreeing with one another, setting forth the facts and circumstances that were presented to you, as far as why you're basing your decision or what about the approval you agree with and why. So.
We're gonna get chattier.
Yes.
We're gonna see Jen go.
I was gonna say, not a challenge.
Yeah. I was gonna say challenge accepted.
With that, it's, I think the favorite time, so,
Motion
I'll make a
to
motion to adjourn.
right,
second out.
all in favor?
Aye,
Aye.
all the ball.
There we are.
Thank you, folks.
Thank
Thank you all.
When something continues.